Welcome to the Saturday Morning Muse, everyone. I'm Andy Tempty, and today is Saturday, February the 18th, 2023. And yes, I have not shaved for over a week. I'm awfully scruffy today. Here we go. In my previous writings, I talk a lot about the benefits of engaging in constructive self-reflection. In my personal planning guidebook, which is a free download on my website, the ability to self-reflect is an integral part of the personal planning process. But what is self-reflection, and how can you get the most from it? We're going to discuss the art and skill of self-reflection over the next 2 weeks. Today, we'll focus on the preconditions for successful self-reflection, and next week, we'll get into specific recommendations for self-reflection sessions. But first, the definition. Oxford Dictionaries defines self-reflection as meditation or serious thought about one's character, actions, and motives. I've found that understanding the what of self-reflection is not very difficult. The how is where the going gets tough. Unfortunately, there are all manner of societal pressures that make self-reflection difficult. Some label it as fluff or weakness. Some surround themselves with so many external voices and stimulation that the concept of self-reflection is foreign and uncomfortable. I'll be the first to admit that I've succumbed to the narrative that tough guys don't self-reflect. I'll also be the first to admit that becoming more in tune with yourself through meditation and reflection is one of the best things you can do for yourself. After all, how can I love me, also known as self-love, if I don't understand me? How can I determine my purpose if I don't check in with myself on a routine basis? How can I continuously improve as a human if I don't look inward and ask the question, what if it's me? What if the problem lies here and not there? So, to get started with building the skill of self-reflection, here are a few tips. First is self-awareness. This is step number 1. If I have no self-awareness, I cannot self-reflect. It's that simple. A tool that I've found helpful in building self-awareness is to learn about the Freudian concept of the ego. Here, I'm not talking about the modern concept of a big ego or a small ego, but instead I'm referring to the strength of one's ego. In the Freudian world, the ego is your internal mediator between your base instincts, also known as the id, and the idealized version of yourself, also known as the superego. A weak ego has a difficult time negotiating between these two voices that live within all of us. To improve self-awareness, focus on strengthening the ego. I purposefully started my podcast, the Balancing Act podcast, with several episodes on the ego. These are episodes 1 through 9. I recommend that you listen to these short discussions to learn about how important the ego is in the development of critical human skills such as self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, resilience, followership, and lifelong learning. Second is to learn about unconscious bias. As you explore the concept of self-awareness, be sure to put energy into understanding the concept of unconscious bias. We all have some form of unconscious bias that lives within us and has been developed over years and, in my case, decades of the shortcuts that our brains take to make sense of and compartmentalize the vast, complicated world that we live in. Here are some examples. Confirmation bias, which is favoring ideas that confirm our existing belief. Optimism and pessimism bias, overestimating the probability of a positive outcome when we're feeling good or vice versa when we're feeling bad. The sunk cost fallacy, believing that if you put effort in, that there should be some form of return. Sometimes you just simply lose. Sometimes a project just doesn't work out and you have to walk away. Next is herd mentality. Blindly following influencers over and over and over again, not thinking for yourself. And then there's anchoring bias, being overly influenced by first impressions or initial data that you have. These are just a sampling of myriad biases that influence how we operate and approach challenges. Third, minimize the role of the itty-bitty-shitty committee that lives within all of us. In her podcast, The Confident Rider, Australian-born Jane Pike uses this terminology frequently to refer to the cacophony of negative voices that swirl inside us. Yes, sometimes our greatest critics live inside our own heads. So, step one is to recognize that you have an itty-bitty-shitty committee that loves to berate, belittle, and judge your every move. Step two is to not allow these voices to dominate the conversation. Be open-minded and kind to yourself during periods of self-reflection. Remind yourself that you're human. You make mistakes, and that taking personal responsibility for a challenge or conflict can be one of the most freeing and beneficial things that you can do for yourself and those around you. So, we'll leave it there for this week. As I mentioned at the top of today's Muse, we'll dive into more of the specifics next week. We'll see you then.